Okay, so I just wanted to take a quick minute to make a video on not necessarily like the how to add the dimensions to your views, but kind of some strategies that can help you with getting your dimensions organized and created in a more useful way. So I've just got the passenger section from the T9 Automoblocks truck, and I've started off with just kind of like a few of your basic views that you might have included. Um, you know, Actually, let's just start off entirely with putting it in and how we might decide which views to include. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my webcam off, and then when we go to insert these views, probably one of the first things that I would look for is getting a good front view, because that's going to help you with laying out everything. So that's probably not the best front view. Remember, one of the things we want is we want to include the longest dimension, and it's sitting in the orientation where it usually sits. So even though that says front, I'm actually going to turn this thing and look at it from the side, in this case, the right side. So we'll put that one kind of right in the middle. Right there. And then I'll put in what would normally be considered the front view off to the side there. Now, in order to get the rest of the views in, they need to be lined up. So we're using this projected view here. So there's the back. I'd project to get the top either there, or if you don't like it sitting sideways, you can project it off of this one. And it's kind of sitting front to back if you like that better. And then we can have an isometric up here. So those would be kind of your basic views. You'd make sure you'd want to have those for sure. One other option to have here is this view doesn't necessarily show me all that much, where a cross section might be better. So that could be another option, would be to get rid of that view and then use a section view right down through the middle. And that serves the exact same purpose of showing that side view, but instead of it being a kind of a not so useful view, I do get to see the depths of those things. So those views look pretty good. The next thing I want to think about is when I go to put these dimensions in, my first thought is I need overall length, width, and height. Where would be maybe my best point to put those in? So maybe I go to this view, dimension here, and I want to put in the overall height. The way I'm going to do that is by clicking on the very top and the very bottom to get that distance there. I do want to make sure with this one, especially because it's got those little fillets on it, that I'm actually clicking on the outsides, not on the filleted part. And then because that's an overall dimension, I'm going to put that fairly far away from the part, centered. It should be centered. One thing I've seen people do is this kind of stuff. That dimension right there is not helpful to me, because I need to know the overall dimension. That's just what happens to be between this little notch and the bottom of this fillet. And that fillet really, I'm going to need to know the size of that fillet, but I don't need to know the distance to that particular point. So there's my height. For my width, I'm going to do kind of the same thing from there to there. And again, I'm going to go pretty far up here. And actually, it would probably be even a better idea to put it down here just so it's more out of the way. And again, center it as much as possible. It'll kind of snap in there in the center. So there's my overall height, my overall width. And then the only view that shows the depth is either this one or this one. I put those wherever I feel like. So maybe I put the depth here in the section view. So from front to back, include that there. So now I've got overall height, width, and depth. Those three dimensions don't go anywhere else. So I don't want to put them anywhere else in this picture. Next thing I want to do is to go through feature by feature. And each feature I want to make sure that I am dimensioning it with its size and its location from a fixed point. It's kind of helpful if you think about it as maybe like I'm going to dimension all of my parts from this bottom corner. So when I go into to put, for example, the dimensions on this, I'm going to go overall height, but then I also need to know how far it is from the bottom. Those two things combined are what are really important. And so this is one way to do that. you've got the size of that hole and how far over it is. And we could do the same thing going this way. Overall width and how far it is from that same exact side. The big thing there is I'm basing those off of the exact same side as each other. And then those dimensions get lined up. You see how they line up with each other? Because they go together. Finally, in this view, another thing I'd want is the radiuses of these fillets. So I only need to put it in once. I'm going to put these in, one there, one there. And the reason I only need them once is because I can go in and just add a capital TYP at the end, which is going to say that that is the typical dimension for all these similar radiuses. Put a space after that if you want. So it kind of looks a little bit nicer. But that's going to tell me that I'm not going to put that dimension in everywhere, but it does show up in multiple places, and anytime you see that same dimension, you know that that's the radius of that. And so they're off at an angle, about 45-degree angle for anything like that. Then from this view, the last thing that I'm seeing is this little cutout. Now that's really small. So this is a good place maybe to use a detailed view. And I'm actually going to use the detailed view from this one. So I'll put in a detailed view of that, and we'll put it, let's make it a little bit bigger. We'll go 3:1, and we'll put it right there. Now, I guess I'm looking at this now, I'm saying, okay, I made that too small. I would like to be able to dimension to the top line, and I can't do that if my detailed view is this small. So I can make it a little bit bigger maybe, or I can recenter it just a little bit. Maybe I can recenter it. Should be able to move it. Whatever. So there we go. Now I can go into this and I can do the same kind of thing. I can look at, whoa, way too far zoomed in. I can look at how deep that is. And since these are really small numbers, I'm going to put that off to the side. How tall that is. And it's on the edge, but I need to know how far it is from the bottom, or from the top in this case. So I'll dimension between those 2 points, and that is 0.3. Now these cross over, I don't like that. So I'm going to drag this one up further. The extension lines here can cross, that's no problem, but I don't want to see these are called the dimension lines themselves. I don't want to see crossing, because that gets hard to read. So these two should be lined up, and then you've got that there. And so that should be good enough for that view. In this view, I'm going to need to know, same deal, overall length and width of this cutout. I already have the length and width of the entire thing, so I just need my dimensions here and here. Again, line those up and do the same thing, go in this direction. And you'll notice these are different from the ones on the other side, just ever so slightly. That's the only reason I'm putting these in. And then the last thing I would need is that exact same information up here. So I need length, I need width, and I'm going to need distance. It doesn't matter which corner. It's a good idea, and usually a nice thing to do, to still go from this exact same corner, which in this case would be here. And so I could dimension from there to there, put that one right in there, and dimension from there to there, put that one right in there. Again, lining those up. You'll see they kind of automatically snap onto those spots. So that's all I need for this one. I guess with the exception of probably should do that radius, because it's probably, there's no guarantee that that radius would have to have been the same as that radius. So we should probably include that on all of these, even though it does happen to be the same. Just so that we know. It's okay if it's in the same view to say that that's typical, but in a different view, we'd want to change that. And so this one would be a good one to add that TYP. And probably the same thing up here wouldn't be a bad idea to add that in. Okay. Now, the only thing that I couldn't have dimensioned in those three views was how deep these go. It's tempting to try to use hidden lines or something like that, but we can't dimension to hidden lines. That's one of the big things we're not allowed to do. So I'm going to go back and grab the dimension tool, and this is where I could dimension how deep these are. So I could say that one's 0.57 deep. That one's also 0.57 deep. I'm going to line those up. And then this depth here is 1.07. So now I've got all of that information that I need in those views, and I'm good to go. At this point, there would be maybe one more thing you'd want to add, which would be the radius of that little tiny fillet there. You can just barely see it. It's that feature there. But that might be a good place to even not put a dimension here if you didn't want to, because it is really, really tiny, 0.01. But you could also leave a note to break all edges. You could just do something like less noted round edges to 0.01. And that would serve the point of just including that information that we need without having to put another dimension in there. You'll see that pretty commonly with things like this, because that's really not a feature of the part. It's just there so that the mold actually works. And so that's what that part would probably look like. That'd be your a good starting point anyway. You've got dimensions that are organized and they're easy to read. They're based off of the features, kind of dimensioning one feature at a time. And we've got all the major things. Now, a couple of other things you might want to look at, or some other strategies. Let me see. I want this one. This one was giving some people some troubles. And so put a projected view in there. A couple of things on this one would be, first of all, anytime you have a circular feature, you need to include a center mark in the views that show it as a circle. So there you can see that's got a center mark in it. And in views that show it as a cylinder, we need to include a center line. So there's a center line. And this one you're not going to be able to see because the section view goes through it, but there's a center line. That's just showing that these things are circular. And so we have all that. Now, in the views that show it as a circle, this is where you're going to want to include diameters. So we've got a diameter of 0.4. And then we're also seeing here these little pieces sticking out, and then that piece. So we're going to go ahead and dimension those as well in this view. 0.3. Oops, not the right one. 0.29. And once we reach a point where we can't really go out without being at an angle anymore, we'll go ahead and go off to the side. We want to try to get an angle in there. Now, for something like these, which are kind of repeated over and over again, a strategy that you can use rather than dimensioning the length of each individual one is to use something called ordinate or baseline dimensioning. And what that lets you do Yeah. Okay. So we can use what's called baseline dimensioning, and it's some tools actually have a special button for this. But what you do is you basically start off at a particular point, and you'll dimension to the first thing, and then you'll dimension to the second thing and put it up a little bit higher, and then you'll dimension to the third thing and put that up a little bit higher, and then you'll dimension to the fourth thing and put that up a little bit higher. And this only works when you're not so much talking about a bunch of separate important features, but like kind of repetitive things like this. Because otherwise it kind of loses focus on what you're trying to do. But something like this, just knowing that each one of these is at a specific point, you can kind of dimension that way to make it go a little bit more smoothly. The other thing that you can do is like I said over on the other one, is when you've got more specific features, focus on the size and the location of those features. It's just on something that's that repetitive like that you might want to go to a different strategy. So there's a couple of hints for getting some things dimensioned in a way that's a little bit more organized. And I will go ahead and add a resource for just some dimensioning guidelines that Project Lead the Way used to provide, but hasn't really, they've taken out of this curriculum, but I think it will help just in something like this where maybe the focus isn't on dimensioning as much as it used to be. But if you're looking for something that can really help your dimensions look a lot better and be a little more professional, I'll include that right below this video in the tutorial section.